You're sitting at your desk when you realize you need something from the kitchen. So you stand up, walk across the room, go through the door, and stop. Why are you here? You know there was a reason. You were thinking about it literally 5 seconds ago. But now your brain has apparently decided that standing in the kitchen and staring at a cabinet is enough of a plan. Usually we blame this on distraction. Maybe your attention wandered while you were walking. And sometimes, sure. But researchers have found something much stranger. Under certain conditions, simply moving from one space into another can make recently held information harder to access, which means the doorway itself might actually matter. Just not for the reason you probably think. And once you notice this, you start seeing versions of it everywhere. You walk upstairs to grab something, halfway into the bedroom, gone. You unlock your phone because you wanted to check something. The home screen appears, and suddenly you have no idea what app you were about to open. You create a new browser tab with a very specific goal. Google loads. Brain empty. Now those aren't all necessarily the exact same psychological effect. Opening Instagram is not scientifically equivalent to walking through a wooden door, but they do share something important. A moment ago your brain had an active goal. Then something changed. New room, new screen, new task, new context. And the goal that felt completely obvious a second earlier suddenly becomes weirdly difficult to retrieve. Psychologists became interested in the physical version of this. Because there's an obvious question. Is it really the boundary that matters? Or do people just forget because walking somewhere takes time? So researchers built environments where they could separate the two. Picture yourself inside a very simple, virtual building. There are rooms, tables, objects, and doors connecting different spaces. Your job is basically to move around, pick up objects, carry them, put them down, and keep track of what you've recently been interacting with. Not exactly Grand Theft Auto, but useful for studying memory. Researchers could then compare two situations. In one, you move a certain distance while staying inside the same room. In the other, you move through a doorway into another room. Similar movement, different boundary. And in several experiments, people were worse at accessing information about recently handled objects after changing rooms. The effect was found in virtual environments, and later in experiments involving movement through real rooms as well. That became known as the doorway effect, or more technically, the location updating effect. And initially, that sounds like scientists have confirmed the most satisfying explanation possible. Doors make you stupid. Unfortunately, it's not that simple. Later researchers have not always reproduced the effect. One series of 4 experiments found no consistent memory drop just from crossing doorways. When participants also had more information competing for their attention, though, memory became more vulnerable to interference after the transition. So a doorway isn't some magical neurological reset button. Your memory does not get wiped every time you enter a bathroom. The effect seems to depend on the situation, the task, what you're holding in mind, and how strongly the transition changes your current context. But that actually points toward the more interesting explanation. Because the important thing may not be the door, it's what the door represents. From your perspective, today feels continuous. You woke up, got dressed, ate something, opened your laptop, started working, maybe got distracted watching a video about why you forget things when you enter rooms. It all feels like one uninterrupted timeline, but your brain seems to organize that timeline into pieces. Imagine going to a restaurant. You walk through the entrance. You speak to someone. You're shown to a table. You sit down. You order, you eat, you pay, you leave. There was no actual cut between any of those moments. Reality didn't pause. But mentally, they don't all feel like one event. Arriving at the restaurant feels different from sitting at the table. Ordering feels different from eating. Leaving feels different from being inside. Your brain is constantly tracking what is happening now, where you are, what you're doing, what objects matter, what your goal is, who is involved. As long as those things stay relatively stable, the current situation makes sense. But when enough changes, the brain updates its model of what's happening. Researchers call these transitions event boundaries, and physical movement can create a very obvious one. Same person, same day, same goal. But now you're in a different room. The doorway becomes a clean dividing line between what was happening there and what is happening here. Researchers studying event perception have found that people naturally break continuous activity into meaningful chunks like this, even when nobody tells them to. So here's a useful metaphor. Your brain isn't quite like one giant document that stays open all day. It's more like a computer constantly switching between workspaces. Your desk might have one collection of information active, then you enter the kitchen, new workspace, different surroundings, different objects, different likely actions. The previous information hasn't necessarily been deleted. It's simply no longer sitting in the easiest place to reach, and that distinction matters. Because now we have another problem. Why can going back sometimes seem to bring the thought back? You've probably done this. You enter the kitchen, forget what you wanted. Stand there for 10 seconds trying to force your brain to cooperate. Nothing. So eventually you give up and walk back toward your desk. And suddenly, oh, water. That's what I wanted. It feels almost as though the thought was sitting there waiting for you. And there's a broader principle of memory that can help explain why that sometimes happens. Memory isn't just about whether information exists, it's also about whether you currently have the right cues to retrieve it. Places can provide those cues, objects can, sounds can, your mental state can. Even the task you were performing when the thought appeared can become part of the context surrounding it. That's why something you've completely forgotten can suddenly return when you see the right object, hear the right song, or revisit a familiar place. The information wasn't necessarily gone, you found a route back to it. This is broadly called context-dependent retrieval. But here's an important complication. Researchers studying the doorway effect once specifically tested whether returning people to the original room would restore access to the information. And it didn't reliably do so. So the simple version, your memory is stored in the room, therefore walking back retrieves it, doesn't really work. The better explanation is probably that several things are happening at once. Context can help retrieval. But crossing an event boundary may also cause your brain to update which information belongs to the current situation. And once that update has happened, simply recreating one piece of the old context may not perfectly reverse it. That also helps explain why this happens more often when the original thought was fragile. Suppose you're at your desk thinking, I need to answer that email. Also, charge my headphones. Actually, I should get water first. You stand up. That intention, water, is competing with several other things. Then you move. The visual scene changes. Your body changes task. New objects become relevant. And the little intention you were carrying has to survive all of that. Sometimes it doesn't. Not because the memory was erased, because it lost the competition for what matters right now. And this is why that phone example feels so familiar. Again, a phone screen is not literally a doorway. But watch what happens. You're doing something. A thought appears. I should check when that package arrives. So you unlock your phone. Immediately you see the time. 3 notifications, a message, an Instagram icon, maybe an email badge. Your brain has moved from one task context into an environment full of completely different cues and possible goals. And suddenly, what was I doing? The original intention may have been held only weakly enough to guide the next action. Then the context switched and something else took over. Task switching itself can create boundaries in how experiences are remembered. So the physical doorway may be one especially clean example of a broader feature of cognition. Your brain is constantly deciding what belongs to now, and what can be moved out of the foreground, which is extremely useful most of the time. Because imagine the alternative. Suppose every detail from the previous few minutes remained equally active. You walk into the kitchen, but your brain is still prioritizing the exact position of your mouse, the sentence you were reading, the sound of your computer fan, the browser tab you had open, the pressure of the chair against your back, the unfinished email, the object sitting beside your keyboard. Your brain would be dragging the entire previous situation into every new one. Instead, event boundaries help organize experience. What belongs together gets grouped together. The restaurant becomes one episode. The drive there becomes another. Your conversation becomes another. Walking into your apartment can mark another transition. This organization can actually help memory over longer periods because experiences gain structure. The downside is that information from just before a boundary can sometimes become less immediately accessible. So the same system that helps keep your life from becoming one gigantic pile of unrelated sensory information may occasionally leave you standing in the kitchen wondering why you've opened the fridge. There's a very simple experiment you can try the next time this happens. Don't treat it as a guaranteed memory trick. Just test it. The next time you walk into another room and your original intention disappears, Don't immediately stand there repeating, "Why am I here? Why am I here? Why am I here?" Instead, walk back toward where the thought occurred. Look at what you were looking at. Return to what you were doing. Recreate as much of that little moment as you naturally can. And see whether something in the original context brings the intention back. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. Because again, the actual doorway research suggests that physically returning to the original room isn't a magic undo button. But pay attention to what finally triggers the memory. Your computer screen, the empty glass beside you, the charger on the desk, the sentence you were reading. That tiny moment gives you a glimpse of how retrieval actually works. Remembering often isn't like opening a perfectly labeled file. It's more like finding the right path into a network. Change the cues, and sometimes you lose the path. Restore the right one, and something that felt completely gone can suddenly become obvious again. And that's why the doorway effect is more interesting than the phrase "walking through doors" makes you forget. Because doors aren't really the story. They're just unusually visible boundaries. You feel like you're moving through one continuous stream of consciousness. But underneath that experience, your brain is constantly sorting reality. This belongs to this place. This person belongs to this conversation. This goal matters during this task. That information mattered a moment ago. This matters now. One event ends, another begins. And usually that transition is so smooth that you never notice it happening until one tiny unfinished thought gets caught on the other side. You walk through a doorway. The scene changes. Your brain updates what it thinks is happening. And suddenly you're standing in the kitchen with absolutely no idea why. You didn't necessarily forget because your memory failed. For a moment, your brain may simply have moved on to the next scene before you were finished with the last one.